I am glad you have been able to join us today for this weekly devotional. A little late in bringing it, and I'm forced to be at the house today, but I still want to bring a short portion of a thought that I've had as we look back over this last week, and I looked a great deal at this hope that we have in Christ. I began to piece some things together and look at what he asks us to do and how we are to seek that hope, maybe how that hope brings it to us, but how we also, after we have that hope, that we're to continue in that hope, that we're to continue in Christ. I want to read a verse out of Galatians, the second chapter, verse 20. Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. We have difficulty sometimes taking a grasp on the idea that Christ gave his life for us. But that's all that gives me salvation. That's all that reconciles me with God. Is that Christ died for me, or at least it's through him. I have to go through the blood of Christ. I have to accept those things he teaches. But it's hard for us to accept that someone died so that our spiritual life might be greater, or that it might be had instead of the physical life. But it's not just given. First off, I must look. Paul says, who loved me and gave himself for me. Who loved me and gave himself for me. That's what makes me begin to look towards Christ. Is that someone would die on the cross for me, that they would offer their blood for the forgiveness of sin. But I still must continue. I must work. He says, if we begin in verse 17, but if in our endeavor in our life, we to be justified, if our endeavor to be justified by God or before God, he says in God, we too were found to be sinners. He said, if we look to Christ or we look to God and we realize, hey, this is who we are. Hey, we need to seek this forgiveness, but I'm lost. I'm a sinner. And then we realize that the only way that there's to this forgiveness is through Christ, through the blood. He said, then as a servant, is Christ then a servant of sin? Certainly not. For if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor. If I don't live within that life that God has set before me, then I'm the one that's a transgressor, not Christ. It's not Christ's fault that forgiveness of sin didn't bring about the change it should. That was up to me. It's up to me. He said, for through the law, I died to the law. And he's talking somewhat to the Jews. We had to remember that at that time they had just came out of the law. But it's no different with us. What if we fall back into the ways that we were in? I become the transgressor, don't I? There's nothing there that can save me. He said, for if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be the transgressor. For through the line, for through the law I died to sin, so that I might live to God. He said, I died to the sin of the world for one reason, that I might live to God, that I might give myself over, that I might seek the way He wants me to live. It's something I have to do, that I might live to God. Then he goes through this verse 20 again, and we come to our second point. First point is I must put myself there. I must begin to do those things. I must search for that salvation. And I must seek it with all my heart. I must realize the love I have for Christ because of what he's done for me. And through that, I began to live my life for God. And then he says in verse 20, I have been crucified with Christ in the flesh. I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Because he gave himself for me, because he died for me, because he was the one that it was through him my life could be changed and could eliminate the sin, could be forgiven. He said, I do not nullify the grace of God. I do not nullify the grace of God. Can you just imagine someone paying your dues to do something and you swear that you're going to do them and you're going to abide by them and then you walk away from them and nullify that love and that greatness and that good that they strove to do for you? He said, I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. He said, the law is useless. That life in which I lived. And for the Jews, it was the law that God had given to in the old covenant. To us, we have to realize that this new covenant that Christ gives is the only thing is we cannot live our life good enough. Period. There are people still fall back into that situation and say, well, I live as good and as moral as anybody else. That's correct. It may be very true. But I haven't been forgiven of my sin. We are not sinless. And we're not comparing ourselves to men. We're comparing ourselves to Christ. He said that Christ died on the cross for us. He said, if we're going to seek this forgiveness, and we're going to receive this eternity with God, we must seek the will of God. If we're going to have this hope, we must seek the will of God. We cannot go back into the old way. It's useless. It's difficult for us. As at times, I want to go back to something I see or something I hear or something I remember or something that feels good to me. Is it of God? It's difficult for us. We must live that life. See, Christ gave his blood for us. We're going to talk about this a little bit more Sunday morning in the lesson that I have or I am preparing, this idea of what it is that God seeks of us, what it is we should do, how we should accomplish it, maybe simplify the idea of what it means to live in hope. What it means to live in hope. I hope you'll join us on Sunday morning. I hope I am able to come back over the weekend and bring another devotional. Uh, if I miss it, please forgive me. I have a lot of things I've got to go through this week. But I want to thank you for being here today. I want you to consider this idea of if I belong to God, if I'm his, I must pursue. I must pursue to live in that hope. I must long for it each day and strive to live in that manner. May God bless you and may take care of you. I want to thank you so much for being here with us. We'll see you sometime later this week.